Westchester, there's Rockland, right? The virus doesn't stop at a border, and these decisions are regional in nature. So now, Broadway obviously is a microcosm, but the overall decisions are all in a regional context, and I think it's going to be the numbers, and when are the numbers low enough that it is safe?
But that number necessarily wouldn't need to be 0, is what you're saying. It could just be low enough.
Yes, yes. I don't think it has to be 0. I don't think look, it may never be 0. It may never be 0. And you have to watch this, you know, when will we go back to normal? You think there's ever going to be a morning that I wake up again in my life not worried about this in the back of my mind? You don't think we're all going to worry about now, is there a second wave? You don't think we're all going to worry about now when somebody sneezes in Asia, how long until that cold comes here? No, but I would not, 0, I don't know that we ever get back to 0. Doctor, you want to mention something?
I concur 100%.
What about hospital capacity? Are we?
Well, let's just go ahead.
Governor, we're hearing that hospitals in Queens, that they don't have the blood gas machines or cartridges, which are critical for operating them. Also, if hospitals do have ventilators, do they have enough operational technicians to operate them?
Do they have enough operational technicians? They must, because somehow they've been working. I don't know what the exact operating technician is for a ventilator, but I have not heard that. I've talked to all the hospitals every day for the past couple of days to find out what's going on, what they need, and the heads of the large hospital systems. Nobody's mentioned that to me. We have over 100 hospitals on the phone, so. What was the first part of your question?
Blood gas machines or cartridges?
Blood gas machine cartridges.
Yeah.
Dr. Zucker is an expert on blood gas machine cartridges. He gave me some for my birthday last year, actually. He said, just in case. I didn't know what he meant at the time. And now I know. And he's going to give me a ventilator this birthday, so I'm going to put it all together. Go ahead, you want to ask the blood gas?
So those are part of the supplies to run the point-of-care testing, which is a blood gas, the lab test that we do at the bedside. And if there is a decrease in supplies, we are looking into all of them to get them to the hospitals that are needed.
I knew that answer, by the way. I knew what a blood gas cartridge was. I wanted the doctor to be able to.
Hospital capacity. You had projected 110,000 beds. It sounds like if we're nearing the apex or at the plateau, whatever, what number do we have? What do we need these temporary facilities? What are the updates on those numbers? Both in
Not full, Micah, you're right. That's my whole point. We're flattening the curve now below projected peaks because of our behavior. But again, Jimmy, you want to talk about this in the retrospective. There is no retrospective. You're in the middle of it. If you walk in front of traffic on the way home, yes, you're young, you may have a different life expectancy based on your action. We are in the middle of it. I'm not going to say to anyone, right now you've seen a little flattening. That's all you've seen. You've seen 4 or 5 days of flattening. Oh, it's flat. No, you have 4 or 5 days of flattening. You could have tomorrow morning we wake up and the number is back up. So I'm not willing to say, because it's not true, that any of this is over or anything has been accomplished, because it's just a small snapshot in time where we are. At this rate, we are below projected numbers.
Governor, your peak projection, what is the number of beds we have now, and what is the number of patients?
There is no new peak projection. There is no new peak projection. Listen to what I'm saying. Nobody is saying we peaked. We have flattened the curve. For this period of time, if you continue doing what you're doing, Might one think the flattening would continue? One might think that, but nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Are you worried about undercounting in terms of people that may have died at home and not been diagnosed with COVID-19?
I think that's a very real possibility.
And have you given any thought, or has anyone?
We're
done
looking
any
at
models?
other models of counting,
Any-
but I don't know, no, I have no idea. The question is, if people died at home, might you not have those numbers because they would only come from basically a funeral home? We're looking at other models because right now most of the data we have comes from hospitals and major institutions, nursing homes. So there could be a deviation, no doubt about that.
And also impact the hospitalization rate, and couldn't that skew the measurements that you guys have been doing on hospitalizations if there have been that many at-home deaths that have not been tallied and those people
No,
have not
nobody
been
said there have
tested?
been that many at-home deaths. Just a question, could there, yeah, there've been, well, people have said there may be people who have died at home who have not been counted. That is a possibility, right. That would never affect the hospitalization rate because the hospitalization rate is the number of people who walk into the hospital, right? That is different than the number of people who have passed away.
Right, but if people were dealing with this illness at home and perhaps they had symptoms that would have been treatable, or it would have caused them to go to the hospital. So, you know, like it's confusing because if people are in the hospitals, right, but if someone's at home because they can't go to the hospital,
Well, you're
how
right.
do you,
If someone
Wait.
never went to the hospital and just stayed at home and passed away at home, they would never show up in the hospitalization rate. They would show up in the number of deaths. There might be, Jesse's point, there might be a lag in the number of deaths because we haven't fully aggregated all the data from all the different sources. That's possible. I don't know how if it's going to be meaningful statistically, but it's possible. So,
One more, are you moving ahead with a temporary hospital?
can I just, I'm sorry, Jim.
Thank you, Governor. Governor, there is an emergency room physician in New York City, and I'm sure Dr. Zucker would want to comment on this too, who says he's seeing a very high percentage of patients, maybe 70%, die who are put on ventilators. He's thinking the approach is all wrong. We need to rethink the protocol, that these patients might not need the ventilators. They might need oxygen instead.
So I think, I can't comment on exactly what they're saying, but the fact is when someone shows up in the emergency room, there's a handful of things that are going to take place. One is the oxygen is an initial therapy that someone needs, but the fact is that if someone's respiratory status gets worse, they're going to need respiratory support. The real question may be, is there other interventions that one can do? And we are looking at what other possible therapies would be out there that could possibly be given earlier, and that's all experimental.
Is it possible the ventilators might be doing more harm than good?
So the issue with ventilators in general is that if someone goes on a ventilator, and the government has spoken about this before, about how long people stay on the ventilator, the longer you stay on the ventilator, you end up potentially causing damage to the lung. It's a pressure that's being pushed into your lungs, and you're constantly putting pressure into those little air sacs in the lungs. It can damage them, and the high levels of oxygen also can damage your lungs. But the fact is, it's what's called the catch-22 in a lot of ways, which is where you need the ventilator, but if you're on it a long time, it can cause harm. That's why you try to get them off as fast as possible.
Is this why it appears Boris Johnson's being treated with oxygen rather than a ventilator?
Excuse me?
Or in Great Britain?
I can't comment on his case, but obviously, because I don't know the information. But when someone comes in, the initial thing to do is to give someone oxygen by mask, and if someone gets worse, then you end up intubating them. What's happened with these patients is that they get worse relatively quickly, and so there's a lot of interventions that have to happen relatively quickly as well.
Yeah, I'm not a medical doctor, obviously, but look, nobody wants to put people on the ventilator. I've discerned that much. And I think you're right, the percentage of people who go on the ventilator who never come off the ventilator is incredibly high. I've even heard like closer to 80%. I think the ventilator is doing that. I think that's why they're on the ventilator. They're doing the ventilator as basically a last resort. So when they put you on the ventilator, it's because everything else has failed, and that's why the mortality rate is so high on the ventilator. And that's what we're seeing here. That death rate is going up because it's the people who've been on a ventilator 7 days, 10 days, 15 days, and they're passing away. So when we had that big increase in hospitalizations about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, that big spike in hospitalizations, what we're seeing is the people who went into the hospital on that day, 10 days ago, 12 days ago, who didn't get better, who was put on a ventilator, is now passing away. And that's what's driving this death toll. And look, that number, what's even making it more depressing and distressing, that death toll probably will be this high or near this high or even higher for the next several days, because it's the coefficient of the high hospitalization rate from 2 weeks ago or so. So when you get up tomorrow morning, the news could be just as bleak. And that's why I'll end where I started, mixed emotions. We are flattening the curve. Thank God. Thank God, thank God, thank God. And thank a lot of good people who have been working very hard. That is a moment in time. Don't get complacent. It's what we're doing that's working. Keep doing it. That's the good news. And that good news has a big caveat. We're still in the midst of it. Don't get complacent. You start acting different, you'll see that number change in 27 minutes. That's the good news. The bad news is we have had a record number of deaths. I mean, I went through 9/11. I thought in my lifetime I wouldn't have to see anything like that again. Nothing that bad, nothing that tragic. I remember the number of funerals after 9/11. I remember the grief after 9/11. That this should literally eclipse that in terms of numbers of dead in this state, it's almost unimaginable to me. Then how do you square those two things? We're making progress. We lost more people than ever before on a single day. Okay, I'm going to work. Thank you, guys.
Temporary hospitals outside of job needs to comfort across the state?
We are not building more. We're still maintaining them. We are still in the midst. Don't get overconfident. Don't get complacent. We're still in the midst of this. This can still turn any way from Sunday.
Governor, have you spoken to Gavin Newsom in California about a possible consortium to buy medical supplies?
I have not talked to him about a possible consortium, but it's one of the things the National Governors Association is talking about. Because what we just went through, where states are competing with other states, this made absolutely no sense for anyone. So a statewide consortium would be a positive alternative, or a federal government that did all of the purchasing instead, Jesse, and then just gave it to the states that
You need
need
a
it.
multi-state consortium, right?
Federal government can purchase, right? When I was in the federal government, FEMA effectively was the shipping clerk. They did the purchasing, they disseminated to the states. That's the simplest system. Federal government on a federal disaster, which means multiple states, that's a federal disaster. They are the purchasing entity. They are the master strategist for the operation. That's option A. If the federal government's not going to do it, option B, let the states as a consortium be a purchasing consortium. That's what the National Governors Association conversation is. Because what happened here, where I place a bid, Chicago places another bid, California places another bid, that's just madness. Talk to you later. Thank you.